Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show.
Looking at Canber's back, Donald shook his head helplessly and turned around to return to the camp of the Tower of Dusk. Canber looked down on the Tower of Dusk, which was a regional force, but his force was no different. However, their power was equal to the Brilliant Shrines, and they even had a great advantage because of the alchemy colossuses. However, there was now the addition of the Tower of Dusk, which had a dwarf that was very learned in the structure of the alchemy colossuses. Once the Tower of Dusk and the Brilliant Shrine could completely unite, what advantage would they have? Archbishop Martin, President Flick, in order not to affect our next discussion on the details of cooperation, I got His Highness, Prince Canber, to head back first. We can go ahead with the discussion now. Donald returned to the tent and explained himself to Lin Li and the Archbishop before returning to his seat. Master Donald, with the absence of a leader for your team, it doesn't seem appropriate to talk about cooperation in this situation. Are you sure you can make decisions on Prince Canber's behalf? If you can't even have a unanimous agreement within your team, what's the point of talking about cooperation? Master Basil, who was beside Lin Li, questioned indifferently. Although it seemed that Donald was not as arrogant and conceited as Canber was, Basil could tell from Donald's tone and behavior after returning to the tent that there was actually no difference between the two of them. They similarly looked down on anyone who was not from the Rotterdam kingdom. Even Master Basil could not stand the way that the people from the Rotterdam behaved. What a joke! Canber spoke in such an unruly manner just now, and you came back without any apology at all. Yet you immediately decided on Evrion's behalf, and went straight to talking about the cooperation. How could there be something so easy? Master Basil's question made Donald's face grow a little sullen, while anger brewed within him. He was the mighty chief imperial mage of the Rotterdam kingdom, and he was already being very respectful by sitting there and discussing a cooperation with the president of a local force. Yet, even a subordinate had the audacity to go against him. However, Donald had just persuaded Canber. How could he forget what he said immediately? He had no choice but to suppress the anger in his heart. He said, "Everyone, rest assured, I can make a decision, and I can guarantee that Canber will never do anything to affect our cooperation." Seeing that the atmosphere was a little tense, Archbishop Martin had no choice but to give everyone an out. Good to hear, good to hear. I believe that under Master Donald's persuasion, Prince Canber probably would not do anything that would affect the cooperation. In this case, President Flick, do you think we can talk about the details of our cooperation now? Even Archbishop Martin was rather sympathetic towards Donald. There was no great difference in the status of two princes, but the status of a prince and that of a crown prince were worlds apart. The team of the Brilliant Shrine was indeed led by the unlookable Prince Jeremiah, but Archbishop Martin could at least suppress him with his position in the Brilliant Shrine. On the other hand, Donald might be the chief imperial mage of the Rotterdam, and also had a high position, but Canber was the genuine heir to the throne. Hence, it was impossible to suppress him. Donald had to have spent a long time convincing Prince Canber to agree to the cooperation. Prince Jeremiah, who was sitting next to Archbishop Martin, was also secretly thankful and glad at this moment. He had not expected the pretentious Canber to be chased out. Fortunately, he had not gone ahead with him and said anything offensive. With that example, Jeremiah immediately behaved himself and remained still in his seat with his head hung low and his eyes fixed on the table as if there was a beautiful painting on it. Lin Li still had to show Archbishop Martin some face. Besides, he had originally intended to make the people of the Rotterdam cannon fodder. Hence, he naturally couldn't really let the cooperation talk stop. After hearing Archbishop Martin's attempt at persuasion, Lin Li nodded and said, "All right, since Master Donald is confident that Prince Canber will not do anything to affect the cooperation, let's put this aside and discuss the details of the cooperation." In fact, Lin Li did not really care whether or not Prince Canber would do anything to affect the cooperation. An insignificant figure like him could easily be destroyed by Lin Li. As long as the people from the Rotterdam fell for it, it would not be up to them to decide if they wanted to be cannon fodder or not when the time came. Since we have reached a consensus on the issue of cooperation, we should exchange information. Master Donald, would you like to share the information you have first? Although Lin Li said to put that matter aside, it was obvious that he was not going to give Donald a good time. Hence, he decided to make them reveal what they knew first. In the current situation, Donald obviously could not say that he was not willing to do so. If that matter had not happened, he could have still played some tricks and tried to decline. However, he now had to show some genuine sincerity. He had no choice but to take out a scroll and unroll it on the table while secretly cursing at Canber for being foolish. He said, "This scroll, which was handed down in our royal family in the Rotterdam kingdom, describes the structure of the Sky Castle. In the past, Lin Li had obtained a design sketch of the Sky Castle in the Scar of Death. At that time, after studying that sketch, Lin Li felt that he could even build a Sky Castle on his own based on the information on the sketch. However, in reality, that was simply impossible. Not only did he need a massive amount of precious materials, the Sky Castle was huge, and its structure was incomparably complex. How could everything be presented on a single sketch? If it was built according to that sketch, Lin Li would not even be able to build a simplified version of the Sky Castle like the Eternal Furnace, much less a real Sky Castle. The only thing that could be built would probably be an ordinary castle on Earth that looked like a Sky Castle, which would be extremely difficult to live in. The painting that Donald took out was not actually a design sketch, but a description of the structure of the Sky Castle. It was like a city map that stated where the control center was, mentioned the important function of each area, and so on. Besides, it only described a small part of the structure of the Sky Castle. Seeing that Donald had taken it out without hesitation, Lin Li reckoned that he had to have a more valuable sketch. However, to Lin Li, the structure diagram was insignificant regardless of whether it was complete or not. He had the control crystal of the Sky Castle, and although he couldn't control the entire Sky Castle now, he could still understand the situation of the Sky Castle through the control crystal. Is this the structure diagram of the Sky Castle? Archbishop Martin asked in shock as he looked at the diagram on the table. Although they had first entered into a cooperation agreement with the people of the Rotterdam, the agreement was only a ceasefire. It did not reach the point of exchanging information. Hence, it was his first time seeing the structure diagram as well. Yes, the ancestors of the Rotterdam Kingdom had the bloodline of the High Elves and the noble position granted by the High Elven Queen herself. Hence, there were a few ancestors who had the privilege of living in this Sky Castle for a period of time. Besides, the structure of this Sky Castle was drawn by those ancestors from memory after they left this place. At the mention of it, Donald couldn't help but reveal a prideful expression. Although only the royals of the Rotterdam Kingdom had the bloodline of the High Elves in the beginning, after thousands and thousands of years of reproduction, the vast majority of people in the current Rotterdam Kingdom could be said to possess a trace of the High Elven bloodline. Hence, even though Donald wasn't a member of the royal family, he was considered a descendant of those ancestors, and there were traces of High Elven blood in his body. PSHT, what's there to be proud of? Aren't you just a bunch of bastards? Jeremiah, the prince of Leaden Kingdom, thought to himself. He was definitely the noble of nobles. However, after a few days of interaction, he still felt the contempt of the people of the Rotterdam Kingdom despite being slow-witted. In the eyes of the people of the Rotterdam Kingdom, only the nobles who had been conferred their titles during the High Elves dynasty could be considered real nobles. The so-called nobles of the human kingdoms, including the royals, were all just country bumpkins. Even the people of the Rotterdam who were not nobles felt that they were superior to other nations because they had the High Elven blood. Of course, Jeremiah's displeasure was limited to just a couple of curses in his heart. One reason was that it involved relations between nations. If he were to voice his thoughts out loud, it would be tantamount to offending everyone in the entire Rotterdam Kingdom, and that would result in disputes between nations. Another reason was that he had already provoked the Tower of Dusk, and would not be stupid enough to mess with the people of the Rotterdam Kingdom next. Donald slightly restrained some of his arrogance, and took a sweeping glance at everyone present. He said, with the structure diagram of the Sky Castle, we can find anything we want easily. At least, we won't have to search around blindly. I believe it will be quite useful for the upcoming exploration. As for the authenticity of this structure diagram, I believe that you all should be able to judge it. It was clear what Donald meant. Since they dared to go there to explore, they definitely knew something about the Sky Castle. If they could not judge the authenticity of the diagram, they would not qualify to cooperate with him. I didn't expect you to actually have the structure diagram of the Sky Castle. Indeed, the guidance of this structure diagram will be of much help to us in our upcoming exploration. Of course, Archbishop Martin also knew that the diagram only depicted a small party of the Sky Castle. However, the so-called exchange of information wasn't really about sharing all the information that they each had. The main purpose was to prove that each of them was worthy enough to be part of the cooperation, and to determine their position in the cooperation. In this case, Archbishop Martin. What preparations has the brilliant shrine made this time? Donald smiled proudly, but instead of urging Lin Li, he directed the question at the brilliant shrine. In Donald's eyes, the strength of the Tower of Dusk could not be considered negligible, but it was not that significant either. The only thing worth valuing was their alchemical expert dwarf. Hence, during that exploration, the only competitor of the Rotterdam Kingdom was actually still the brilliant shrine, as it had always been. What we have is a far cry from this structure diagram of the Sky Castle, Archbishop Martin said humbly. At the same time, he took out a wooden box and placed it on the table. He gently pressed the lid to open it, revealing the item inside. Key. After seeing what was in the box, Donald and Lin Li were momentarily stunned. It was just a key that looked extremely normal. Beside it, there were many more like it. However, after recovering from shock, Lin Li immediately saw from the appearance of those keys that they were not meant for unlocking ordinary locks. After understanding that, Lin Li immediately thought of something. He wondered, could these keys be used for opening the doors of some important places in the Sky Castle? Yes, these are keys. There are 36 sets of keys here, the very ones used to open the gates of the 36 magic towers, not including the central tower. These keys were part of a relic found in a ruin of the High Elves that was unearthed by a few bishops shortly after the end of the Dark Age. Although Archbishop Martin said that it was inferior to Donald's structure diagram, he actually sounded extremely confident at this moment. Anyone could tell that apart from the central tower, there was definitely a large amount of treasures in the other 36 magic towers of the Sky Castle as well. Although one might not really be denied entry without those keys, there would definitely still be a great price to pay if one were to try and barge in. After all, the owner of the Sky Castle had still been the Immortal King. In fact, Donald was still doubting whether Lin Li had really explored the Sky Castle. He had heard from Archbishop Martin that Lin Li was still just a level 22 legendary mage when he'd first explored the Sky Castle. Even though several forces had joined forces, the strongest in the team was only an elder of the elves, who was probably only at level 23. Donald could not imagine how a force like theirs had actually dared to explore the Immortal King's Sky Castle, and even managed to obtain quite a few treasures from the central tower. The Immortal King was a mythical figure. If his Sky Castle had been invaded that easily, wouldn't it have been a huge joke? After seeing the keys in the wooden box, Donald could not help but reveal some eagerness in his eyes. It was not that the diagram he had was useless. The 36 magic towers of the Sky Castle were supported by the sanctuary powerhouses of the High Elves in the past. There had to be plenty of incomparably precious treasures in there. More importantly, Archbishop Martin also said that the 36 sets of keys were only a part of it. Hence, could there be more keys that could be used to open the other doors in the Sky Castle? Of course there were. The magical 1000 contraption lock could not be opened just by using keys. There was a special unlocking method for every lock. Archbishop Martin should have mastered those unlocking techniques as well. Otherwise, those keys would only become garbage, and there would be no need for him to take them out. With the guidance of the Sky Castle's structure diagram, as well as the keys that could be used to accurately open all sorts of doors, the gains of the exploration would definitely reach a shocking extent. Even the Rotterdam Kingdom, which had never experienced war and had inherited countless wealth from the Dark Age, still could not be compared to the Immortal King's treasures in abundance. Archbishop Martin and Donald both took out things that were enough to reflect their value, be it the Sky Castle's structure diagram or the keys that could be used to open the magical 1000 contraption lock. They were all extremely valuable items. At this moment, both of them looked at Lin Li, waiting for him to take out one of his possessions. In reality, both the structure diagram and keys did not mean much to Lin Li. Even though Lin Li's control crystal seemed to have encountered some hindrance after they arrived in the Sky Castle, it did not stop him from getting a generic understanding of the Sky Castle, which was probably clearer than the structure diagram. As for the magical 1000 contraption lock, it was under the control of the control crystal. Back then, even the complicated magical 1000 contraption lock of the central tower was unlocked, not to mention the others. However, it was not the time for Lin Li to take out the control crystal yet. He was still expecting the people from Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom to be his cannon fodder. Once he revealed the information of the control crystal, everyone would know that he was going to become master of the Sky Castle. No one would be willing to work with him anymore. However, even if Lin Li did not mention the matter of the control crystal, he still had other valuable information. One of the most important reasons why people from the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom wanted to cooperate with Lin Li was because he had experience in exploring the Sky Castle. Experience was something that seemed flimsy and intangible, but it could not be ignored. Lin Li did not hold back when he was sharing his experience. Instead, he told everyone present in the room in great detail about the things he had encountered and done when he explored the Sky Castle back then. The only thing he kept to himself was probably the matter regarding the debris of the stars. Besides, that had no effect on his overall description anyway. Lin Li wasn't worried that he would lose value in the hearts of the others after describing his experience without reservation. The more open and unreserved he was, the more others would think that he had something important to hide. Humans just liked projecting one's conjectures on others and jumping to conclusions. Lin Li did hold back the details about something important, which was the control crystal of the Sky Castle. However, in terms of his experience in exploring the Sky Castle, there was really nothing worth reserving. At the end, Lin Li mentioned the ghost, which was actually the thing that the others were most concerned about. The team from the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom had arrived a few days earlier than the Tower of Dusk, but they had been staying close to the edge of the Sky Castle because they could vaguely sense that it was likely that there were many other guardians aside from the magic gears and magic traps. The appearance of the physical vengeful spirits was an omen. Since there were physical forms of vengeful spirits, were there any other guardians of higher levels? In fact, almost all of the large-scale ruins of the High Elves were protected by many guardians. Would the Sky Castle be an exception? They dared not take the gamble with the lives of their own people. After all, the former owner of the Sky Castle was the Immortal King. In various legends and myths, many of the Immortal King's subordinates were psychotic powerhouses. However, when they heard Lin Li say that they were forced to leave the Sky Castle because of a legendary level ghost, everyone let out a sigh of relief. Donald smiled confidently and said in a relaxed tone, "It turns out that it was just a ghost that was at the peak of the legendary level. Although the undead heaven is a pain in the neck, I believe it won't be that difficult to deal with it, with the help of our friends from the Brilliant Shrine." Although Archbishop Martin didn't say anything, the expression on his face was also quite relaxed. Undead creatures were the beings that the people of the Brilliant Shrine were the least afraid of. It would be no exaggeration to say that the powerful purification power of the Brilliant Shrine could allow the people of the Brilliant Shrine to deal with 10 times as many undead creatures of the same level. However, Lin Li shook his head lightly with a smile and said, "The peak legendary level was the power that the ghost had when we left back then. What's wrong with that? It's only been a few years, since that happened. The guardians of the High Elven ruins usually face a gradual decline in their strength, not an increase. In another few years, that ghost might even fall below the legendary realm," Donald said self-righteously. In fact, Donald's thoughts were not considered wrong, as it should be common sense. Age was a ruthless butcher's knife. Regardless of how strong the guardians might be, they would all age and decline with time, gradually losing their powerful strength and abilities. The current era was still not very far away from the annihilation of the High Elves. It had only been more than 1,300 years since then. If it had been 13,000 years, the ruins might no longer have been dangerous. The guardians of the ruins would decay, and the magic gears and magic traps would lose their effect. President Flick, that is indeed the case. Maybe that ghost strength was at the sanctuary realm, and after thousands of years, it has fallen to the peak of the legendary realm. Such things are actually very common in the exploration of ruins. Archbishop Martin agreed with Donald's words. Besides, they were in the Immortal King's Sky Castle, and the peak legendary level strength might be considered strong out there, but it did not seem enough for it to qualify to be the guardian of the Sky Castle. Hence, the greatest possibility was that the strength of the ghost had declined from the sanctuary realm. Archbishop Martin, you may take a look at this, especially those 36 towers. I think you should be able to recognize them with your knowledge, said Lin Li, who did not immediately retort, and instead handed Archbishop Martin a sketch which was actually a replica of the one he got from the Scar of Death. Archbishop Martin grabbed the sketch and took a careful look at the position of the 36 towers, as well as the streets that connected them after hearing Lin Li's prompt. After a while, he suddenly widened his eyes, which were originally squinted, as if he was looking at something terrifying. He shrieked, "Is this a psychic array?" Necromancers had always been the purification subjects of the Brilliant Shrine, and Archbishop Martin of the Brilliant Shrine was extremely clear on the means used by the necromancers. Originally, he would not think about that when he had the diagram of the Sky Castle. However, after hearing Lin Li's reminder, he could soon tell from the layout of the 36 magic towers that it was a psychic array. That was also because he was unaware of the existence of the conquering Magath. Hence, he could easily see the psychic array. Psychic array, it actually has the entire Sky Castle as its foundation. This is terrifying. Although Archbishop Martin had also experienced many great events and was quite knowledgeable, he couldn't calm down after seeing the psychic array that was made up of the 36 magic towers. Upon hearing Archbishop Martin's shriek, Donald and Prince Jeremiah, who had been silent, also had a sudden change in expression. They thought of the vengeful spirits, and realized that it was no wonder such low-level creatures could break through to the legendary level, in addition to not being weakened by time. However, Donald quickly thought of another problem, and looked at Lin Li with a frown. He said, "President Flick, this doesn't seem to make sense. Since there is such a powerful psychic array, how could that ghost strength be only at the peak of the legendary level?" Indeed, according to the average person's thought, the guardian of a ruin should be extremely strong, especially in this place. Being at the peak of the legendary level was probably not enough. However, if the ghost itself was in the sanctuary realm, Not only would its strength not decline with the help of such a powerful psychic array, it would also be continuously improved, and it might even be possible for it to reach the pinnacle of the sanctuary realm. That ghost is not the original guardian of this place, but it was placed here later by High Lord Osric, Lin Li explained, revealing yet another shocking piece of news. That piece of news was even more shocking than the psychic array. High Lord Osric was another mythical figure after the Immortal King. Besides, in the people's memory, he was much more brutal and psychotic than the Immortal King, an existence that was far more terrifying. For a moment, the tent became quiet. Everyone was dumbfounded by the piece of news, and even their breathing subconsciously became lighter. However, a moment later, a snort of laughter broke the silence in the tent. Donald's expression returned to normal, and he said with some contempt in his voice, "President Flick, this news is too shocking. Why would Osric leave a ghost there?" Obviously, Donald didn't quite believe what Lin Li said. Although Osric had died an inexplicable death, he was also a powerful existence that was at the peak of the sanctuary realm in the past. Even if there was a psychic array in the Sky Castle, the ghost was placed there to be nurtured with the power of the psychic array. However, what was the point of that for a powerful being at the peak of the sanctuary realm? After hearing Donald's reminder, Archbishop Martin also had some apprehension in his eyes. Despite genuinely believing Lin Li, the news did seem strange and unexplainable. Lin Li did not flare up at Donald's suspicion, and instead smiled nonchalantly. He said, "The reason is simple. It's for the sake of pursuing the so-called immortality." Pursuing immortality. His words made Archbishop Martin and Donald even more puzzled. What did the pursuit of immortality have to do with the ghost, they wondered. As far as I know, Osric used the souls of 100,000 humans to create this ghost, and it's very likely that he had incorporated his soul brand into the ghost. Relying on the power of the psychic array to nurture the ghost would be akin to nurturing his own soul. He had also created a perfect body for himself. Once this ghost reaches the peak of the sanctuary realm and fuses with the perfect body, it might be able to take the final step and achieve true immortality. Of course, just voicing that speculation was not enough for him to gain everyone's trust. Hence, Lin Li took out another item, which was a few pages of Osric's notes that documented Osric's thoughts. These few pages were placed in his crystal coffin back then. Due to the fact that they had nothing to do with any magical knowledge, they were not submitted to the Supreme Council. Although Osric did not mention that his soul brand was related to the ghost, nor did he mention the ghost at all, it proved Lin Li's speculation to a great extent. In this case, are we going to face Osric's soul? After reading the notes, the people present somewhat believed Lin Li's conjecture, although they still had some doubts. However, it would be too scary to think about it that way. Osric himself was a sanctuary powerhouse, who was at the pinnacle of the realm. Once his soul brand and the ghost fused, it would be akin to making the ghost reach the peak of the sanctuary realm. It just needed to continuously absorb plenty of mana. However, this sky castle was known to be the most powerful one out of the 7 sky castles. The thing it lacked the most was infinite mana, although it had only been 2 to 3 years since Lin Li had explored it too. The ghost probably had stepped into the pinnacle of the sanctuary realm, since it was at the peak of the legendary realm then. However, since the teams from the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom had the guts to explore the Immortal King's Sky Castle, they definitely had something to rely on. Originally, they were already prepared to fight the possible guardians of the ruins, but now they were going to face a ghost. They refused to believe that the ghost would reach the peak of the sanctuary realm within just 2 to 3 years. If that was really the case, the ghost would have already made a move when they and the others had set foot there long ago. After the 3 forces exchanged information with each other, they finally decided to cooperate. In fact, it was mainly the issue between the Tower of Dusk and the Rotterdam Kingdom. Even if Lin Li did not provide any useful information, the Brilliant Shrine would still cooperate with him. Not months. The author is saying the same thing, but even if more than a year passed, it should have been less than 2. Okay. So either the author miscalculated the time, or he simply didn't make it clear enough. President Flick, the alchemical ideas of that alchemist who works for you have given us some inspiration yesterday. Now that we are partners, I wonder if we can invite that alchemist to exchange ideas with us about alchemy colossuses. I believe it will be helpful for our next exploration and the battles we may encounter, Donald requested right after they settled on cooperation. Although he claimed to want to interact and exchange ideas with Angelano, he simply wanted to get more techniques that could improve the performance of the alchemy colossuses from Angelano. Logically speaking, that request wasn't overboard, since they were already partners. Improving the combat power of partners would be beneficial to everyone in the upcoming operations. However, it was too hypocritical of Donald to call it an exchange of ideas. With Angelano's standards in alchemy, it would be more than apt to say that he was going to educate them. Oh, forget about communication or whatever. Angelano doesn't like to communicate with people. How about this? Bring your alchemy colossuses over, and I'll get him to hurry up and fix them for you. I don't dare to make big promises, but I can guarantee that he will upgrade the combat power of your alchemy colossus by more than half. Lin Li appeared to be rather magnanimous. Don't you just want to improve the combat power of your alchemy colossuses? Your people don't have to do it. I'll get my subordinate to get it done for you. However, how could Donald dare to hand his own alchemy colossuses over to someone else to fiddle with? Besides, Lin Li was just his temporary partner, and there might even be a conflict of interests between them in the end. God knew what strange things they might do to his alchemy colossuses. If the alchemy colossuses were to break down at a critical juncture, he would be asking for doom. Even Donald could not stand the contempt that Lin Li had for the Rotterdam Kingdom's standards of alchemy, which was especially reflected in his words. He couldn't help but be thankful and glad that Prince Canber had left a long time ago. Otherwise, he would have flipped the table at this moment. Master Donald, since you don't feel at ease and comfortable with that, how about this? The Tower of Dusk can provide you with some parts of alchemy colossuses, such as the positioning devices for the joints of the alchemy colossus. Those items are nothing too technical, and you should be able to install them yourselves by following the example shown yesterday. I think this can also play a role in improving the combat power of your alchemy colossuses. It will allow you to better exhibit your aggressive, attacking ability in the next exploration. Lin Li obviously had a motive for being that kind. To put it bluntly, he just wanted the alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam Kingdom to be cannon fodder. Actually, what Lin Li said was the truth. If the actions of the alchemy colossuses could become as fluid as humans, that would definitely increase their combat power by a large margin. If the joint positioning devices were installed in every alchemy colossus, it would increase their combat power by at least 20–30%, which was significant. However, when Donald heard those words, he almost got internal injuries because of his infuriation. The positioning device in the joints of the alchemy colossus, which they had studied for a long time yesterday and still could not figure out the principles of, was actually disregarded as an object that Lin Li claimed not to require much technical knowledge. To add insult to injury, Lin Li even said that he could maximize the alchemy colossus' ability to fight at the forefront, which was tantamount to making the alchemy colossus cannon fodder. President Flick, since you're so generous, I'll accept it. However, when it comes to attacking, our alchemy colossuses are, after all, somewhat inflexible with their large bodies. The narrow streets of the Sky Castle are not suitable for the alchemy colossuses to be put into action. On the other hand, the performance of the Tower of Dusk's knights yesterday really impressed me. I reckon they should be extremely useful in such an environment. After suppressing his anger, Donald immediately restored his normal expression. He thought, I'll take the items, but charging and fighting at the forefront is still best suited to your knights from the Tower of Dusk. As soon as Donald said that, the face of Prince Jeremiah, who had been silent, grew sullen before Lin Li could react. The performance of the Tower of Dusk's knights that Donald called impressive was shown in the battle they had with the paladins of the Brilliant Shrine. Jeremiah had originally been treating that incident as something that he was ashamed of, yet Donald brought it up. It was just the same as revealing his old injury. Although he agreed with making the people of the Tower of Dusk go as cannon fodder, he didn't want to make things too easy for the people of the Rotterdam Kingdom. Hence, he said, indeed, the combat power of the Knights of the Tower of Dusk is excellent, but the alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam Kingdom and their incredible defense are truly enviable as well. If the alchemy colossuses and the knights work together, I believe nothing will be able to stop us. Jeremiah's words were actually rather far-fetched. The streets of the Sky Castle were extremely narrow in the first place. If the alchemy colossuses and the knights were to squeeze together, they might just create a huge mess, let alone fight the enemies. All in all, the intentions of the three forces were similar. They just wanted others to take the rap while they collected the benefits. However, they could not ignore that problem, as there would definitely have to be someone standing at the forefront to commit the dangerous acts. If everyone retreated, there would be no exploration. Due to the fact that the matter was directly related to their immediate interests, the three forces discussed that issue back and forth for 2 to 3 hours before finally reaching a consensus. On the side of the Tower of Dusk, Lin Li showed them all the alchemy colossus technology that he mastered, thus leaving Donald with no choice but to give in to temptation regardless of how unwilling he was. On the other hand, the Brilliant Shrine made an agreement with the Rotterdam that if they encountered a hostile undead creature, they would have to enhance the alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam with holy light magic and bear a large portion of pressure in battle. Since we, the people of the Rotterdam, will have to bear the greatest risk, I'm going to make things clear beforehand. In this Sky Castle, there is a lost treasure of the Rotterdam Kingdom that is placed in the control center of the Sky Castle. It is an item that we must obtain, and anyone who tries to get their hands on it will be declaring war against our nation. After talking about responsibilities, it was naturally time to talk about the benefits. Donald was already suppressing his infuriation from the beginning. At this moment, he immediately stated his demands without any rudeness while taking out a long list of treasures. The teams from the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom had previously explored the goods transfer station that had a teleportation portal because it was actually meant for the logistics of the Sky Castle. Although they did not make any actual gains there, they had found some lists of supplies that recorded the various supplies and treasures that had been sent to the Sky Castle, hence the list in Donald's hand, and the copy of it held by the team from the Brilliant Shrine. They had divided the items when they discussed the cooperation previously. Donald's request was actually not excessive, but after the crowd listened to what he said, they couldn't help but curse in their hearts about how shameless he was. The Rotterdam Kingdom was established at the end of the Dark Age, when the High Elves had already been annihilated. When the Sky Castle entered the Spacetime Rift, the ancestors of the Rotterdam Kingdom's royal family were still working for the High Elves like minions. How could they have lost any treasures there? Actually, the structure diagram of the Sky Castle was what the Rotterdam Kingdom ancestors had left behind. They had probably already been coveting the High Elves' possessions when they were working as minions for them. Of course, the people of the Rotterdam could explain it by saying that their ancestors had merely infiltrated the enemy's internal department, bearing with the shame and humiliation while they were just spies in reality. When it came to benefits, everything else would become secondary. Archbishop Martin then stated his requests, and similarly took out his own list. The main purpose of our expedition this time is to find a crown that once used to belong to the first generation High Elven Queen. According to the information we have, it's stored somewhere in the Sky Castle. It might seem absurd that the crown of the first High Elven Queen would actually be in this Sky Castle, but Lin Li was not surprised, because he had met Prince Bahir's soul. The only thing that he was curious about was whether or not it could be some sort of token of love that the High Elven Queen had given to the Immortal King while he gave her his staff. Lin Li took a glance at the two parties' lists to see that the items listed were either powerful magical weapons or precious treasures that were already extinct. After briefly reading them, Lin Li returned the lists and said, "All right, if there are no objections, everything else that is not included on the lists will belong to the Tower of Dusk." Actually, one of the reasons Archbishop Martin and Donald took out the lists was to explain what they wanted, and also to find out what Lin Li wanted. After all, the two lists were decided upon after some eliminations during the cooperation agreement that the Brilliant Shrine had with the Rotterdam Kingdom previously. It could be said that together, the two lists already contained almost all the valuable items in the Sky Castle. However, now that they had an additional partner, the Tower of Dusk, they decided to take out their list so that they could find out what Lin Li wanted, and perhaps spare some for the Tower of Dusk after some discussion. To their surprise, Lin Li did not ask for anything after seeing the lists, and simply returned them while saying that he would take the items not included on the lists. In Archbishop Martin's and Donald's opinion, there was nothing else that would be valuable left. Of course, they wouldn't have thought that the purpose of Lin Li's visit was actually the entire Sky Castle. That was obviously not on the list. The last time Lin Li had explored the Sky Castle, he did not have a clear goal. Hence, as soon as he exited the teleportation portal, he headed straight to the central tower because everyone knew that the treasures there were the most valuable. However, it was different this time. The people of the Rotterdam Kingdom wanted to go to the control center to find that so-called lost treasure, while the Brilliant Shrine was going to another place to get that crown. Besides, the items stated on their lists were not placed in the same location, or rather, no one knew exactly where they were all kept. Hence, they would definitely have to conduct a large-scale search. Hence, it was inevitable for them to have different opinions again. After all, the area of the Sky Castle was too large, and they had to take into consideration a ghost that might be in the sanctuary realm. Everyone wanted to reach their goal first so that they would have no regrets in escaping even if they failed to defeat the enemy. However, regarding that issue, Lin Li was not going to compromise easily. He could forego the items on the lists, but his goal, which was the central tower of the Sky Castle, could not be delayed in any way. Lin Li wanted to enter the central tower again. The other two teams could pick up the things along the way, but they couldn't go on a detour. Lin Li did not want the two teams to pull out and run away after getting what they wanted, thus leaving him alone to deal with the ghost. If that happened, what would be the point of a cooperation? Hence, Lin Li thought that if the ghost came out earlier, the three forces could cooperate and fight with it. If the ghost refused to come out, they would have to at least obtain the controlling rights to the Sky Castle, so that even if the other two forces ended up running away, he could still suppress the ghost with the power of the Sky Castle. This time, They finally saw the benefits of Lin Li's generosity. Since he said that he did not want any of the treasures on the list, would the other two forces still have the nerve to say anything more about that? Of course, it wasn't that those two forces had given up all their rights. They could still find themselves as many advantages as possible in terms of choosing the route for getting to the central tower. Apart from not being able to go around to the opposite side of the Sky Castle, they could still choose a good entry route within a certain range left and right of where they were now. The discussion mainly took place between Archbishop Martin and Donald. They all hoped to get as many benefits as possible before they ran into the ghost. Hence, the discussion got rather heated as well. Lin Li did not care how agitated they were while arguing. He would only interject and bring them back to reality when they got too much into detouring. After a heated argument, the two parties finally agreed on an entry route. They decided to enter through a spot that was not too far from them. Actually, the most important point was that the streets there appeared wider than in the other places, thus making it more suitable for the teams of the three forces, especially since they had the alchemy colossuses from the Rotterdam Kingdom. Regardless, the cooperation's layout was considered to be all settled, and everyone was relieved. Not wanting to waste any more time, Archbishop Martin and Donald stood up to bid farewell to Lin Li. After settling on a time, they eagerly returned to make preparations for exploring the Sky Castle. Lin Li sent the three of them out of the camp, and when he returned, he gathered the team together with Master Basil to prepare for entering the Sky Castle. Angelano, who was dressed in a fancy and colorful outfit, went to him, proudly to inform him that he had taught the mages about the weaknesses of the Rotterdam Kingdom's alchemy colossus. Fallest stories at N.V.L. by N. Com. The preparations of the teams from the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom were made rather quickly. Soon, the three forces met each other and arrived at the place in the Sky Castle that they had agreed upon previously. In order to set up the central tower, the layout of the Sky Castle's buildings was rather strange. If one were to look into the Sky Castle, they would be able to see the central tower, but they would have to take a long detour. When Lin Li first explored the Sky Castle, he only brought two undead servants with him. Hence, he did not even have to consider whether the streets were wide enough or not. He simply chose the best route, and thus managed to reach the central tower in the shortest time possible. Now, the members of the teams of the three forces amounted to 1,000 people. The alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam Kingdom would take up even more space, so it would be impossible to take a shortcut. Hence, when discussing the route earlier, Lin Li allowed Archbishop Martin and Donald to continue arguing. When they arrived at the entrance to the street, the teams of the three forces followed the plan that they had discussed and settled on previously. The Rotterdam Kingdom's team would be responsible for pushing with the alchemy colossuses in front, while the Knights of the Brilliant Shrine would be responsible for guarding the flanks of the team, and the priests would be protected in the middle, ready to enchant the people around them with holy light magic at any time. As for the Tower of Dusk's team, they stayed at the back. To put it nicely, they were defending the back, and to put it bluntly, they were just sitting back and watching the ones in front fight to death. If one looked in from the entrance of the street, the scene would look bright and clear. The central tower in the distance was surrounded by all sorts of buildings with irregular height. However, when the expedition entered the street, thick fog suddenly surged in the surroundings. In the fog, one's vision was compressed to a limit of about 100 meters. All the objects beyond that distance would be completely blocked by the fog. However, the people in the team were in the end elites of the various forces. They did not panic or become flustered because of the changes. The entire team was still orderly. Still, at this moment, Lin Li was secretly shocked. He did not sense the activation of the magic gears at all. Hence, the release of the fog was clearly due to someone's secret manipulation. The most likely culprit was the ghost that was still nowhere to be found. The team slowly moved forward in the fog, and had only covered a distance of several hundred meters when the sounds of heavy footsteps suddenly came out of the fog in front, followed by a few massive figures that gradually became visible. It turned out to be a few alchemy colossuses. Those several alchemy colossuses were not any larger than the alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam Kingdom. Instead, they were much smaller and shorter. However, every part of their bodies was even, and they had a streamlined silhouette. Unfortunately, the bodies of those alchemy colossuses were devoid of any metallic luster, and instead had a dull gray color, which made them look like they had decayed. When Lin Li first explored the Sky Castle, he encountered very few obstacles, but he heard from the elves that they had encountered the attacks of some alchemy colossuses. Those alchemy colossuses were not controlled by humans, but were a type of magical weapon that fused the high elves with undead creatures. Compared to alchemy colossuses controlled by humans, those magical weapons were much more agile and flexible in their movements. Each could be considered a human with a metal body. Actually, they were somewhat similar to the alchemy puppets that Lin Li had obtained from the Immortal King's laboratory, but were larger and more powerful. Upon sight of the alchemy colossuses, numerous metallurgists from the Rotterdam Kingdom's team couldn't help but shriek in shock. With excitement written all over his face, Donald said, "Catch them, but don't destroy them." To the people of the Rotterdam, those grey alchemy colossuses were a massive amount of wealth just because of the technology they were created with. Hence, Donald's first thought was not to destroy the enemy and advance forward, but to capture the alchemy colossuses and study them. However, each of the grey alchemy colossuses possessed legendary level strength, and the technology used within them were superior grade. While the flexibility of the manipulation of undead creatures allowed them to have combat power that greatly surpassed that of the alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam Kingdom, it would not be an easy task to defeat the grey alchemy colossuses, let alone capture them. They covered 100 meters in the blink of an eye. The alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam Kingdom and the several grey alchemy colossuses collided forcefully. It was an extremely violent and direct fighting style which was similar to a low-level street fight between gangsters. However, it seemed shocking when it came to alchemy colossuses. The ground beneath their feet trembled during the fierce battle, and the sound of a violent collision was deafening. However, the people of the Rotterdam soon discovered that if their alchemy colossuses were like low-level gangsters from the streets, the other party would undoubtedly be considered warriors with good martial arts skills. One reason was that human manipulation wasn't as flexible as the manipulation done by undead creatures. Another reason was the fact that Donald had ordered them to capture the alchemy colossuses, thus somewhat restraining the alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam. If it was in an open area, they might really be able to capture those several grey alchemy colossuses with the number of alchemy colossuses they had. However, even though they were already on the widest street, they still could not let the Rotterdam Kingdom's alchemy colossuses encircle the enemies. Destroy them, don't waste any time. Seeing this situation, Donald had no choice but to bear with his reluctance, give up on the idea of capturing the alchemy colossuses, and order them to end it quickly. As soon as they heard Donald's order for them to end the battle quickly, the alchemy colossuses immediately broke free, and their attacks suddenly became much more vicious and unrestrained. After all, the Rotterdam Kingdom had been studying alchemy colossuses for thousands of years, and their combat power was actually still incredible. In particular, the alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam Kingdom also had a set of coordinated battle techniques that were similar to human battle formations. They could exert great combat power too. Although those grey alchemy colossuses were powerful and had reached the legendary level, alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam Kingdom outnumbered them, and they had specialized battle techniques as well, thus causing the grey alchemy colossuses to each face the ferocious attacks of 3 alchemy colossuses at the same time. The Rotterdam Kingdom had been researching alchemy colossuses for thousands of years, and although they might not be able to compare to the grey alchemy colossuses in terms of technology, in the end, they actually had a lot of weaknesses in common. For example, the joints of the alchemy colossus were weaknesses that all metallurgists knew about. However, due to the high demand for flexibility in the joints, no one had really overcome that problem even until now. Of course, the weaknesses of the grey alchemy colossuses were present in those of the Rotterdam Kingdom as well. However, in the current battle, there were at least more alchemy colossuses from the Rotterdam Kingdom with specialized battle tactics, where there were ways to assist each other while dealing with the enemies by targeting their weaknesses. That was actually the same as the human battle formations. However, due to the conditions of the alchemy colossus, it might not be as complex and flexible as the human battle formations. The battle increased in intensity all of a sudden. In fact, one could even see the clashing waves of sound stirring in the fog. However, a moment later, silence was restored. The several grey alchemy colossuses had already been paralyzed and deformed as they fell onto the ground. The red eyes in their heads gradually dimmed as well. That was the difference between an alchemy colossus and humans. Even if the grey alchemy colossuses had reached the legendary level, while those of the Rotterdam Kingdom were only at level 19, the difference was not massive as people thought. Human legendary powerhouses would never be threatened when facing a few level 19 attackers, be it the mages or sword sages. Annihilating them would be easy. However, only the power of the alchemy colossus was strong, not its realm. The difference in sheer strength could be made up for through various methods. As long as there were enough of them, even ants would be able to bite an elephant to death. Besides, the difference between an alchemy colossus of the Rotterdam and a grey alchemy colossus was not the same as that between an ant and an elephant. Looking at the shattered grey alchemy colossuses, Donald stopped, showing a reluctant gaze. He did not make anyone pack up the mutilated wreckage either, even though there might still be something worth studying in those remains. Instead, he directly ordered them to move on. The combat power displayed by the alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam was still rather shocking, especially to the team from the Brilliant Shrine. While they had worked with the people of the Rotterdam way earlier, it was their first time seeing such a battle. Although the people from Brilliant Shrine did not say anything, the expressions on their faces were a little more somber. In the eyes of the people of Brilliant Shrine, facing those alchemy colossuses would indeed be tricky, as they were all like metal fortresses. Be it physical or magical defense, they were already strong enough to reach an intimidating stage. Although the holy light magic of the Brilliant Shrine was not only effective against undead creatures, its power was definitely reduced when used against the incredible defensive abilities of the alchemy colossuses. At the back of the team, the people of the Tower of Dusk watched the battle of the alchemy colossuses. Although they were shocked as well, they had other thoughts in mind. The mages of the Tower of Dusk's team had long learned about the weaknesses of the Rotterdam's alchemy colossus. Hence, at this moment, they mostly thought about putting themselves in opposition against the alchemy colossus of the Rotterdam Kingdom and things they would do to defeat them using the methods taught by Angelano. The team started advancing again, but before they could go far, a few grey alchemy colossuses emerged from the fog again. This time, there was no need for a special order from Donald, as the alchemy colossuses at the front rushed forward and took the initiative to pounce on the enemies without hesitation. They launched a ferocious attack and aimed to destroy the enemy in the shortest possible time. Of course, the combat style of the alchemy colossuses was not just a brutal melee. They would also cast offensive spells using the alchemy arrays on their bodies. However, the thick fog around them not only blocked their vision, it also greatly affected their other senses. It was impossible to extend their detection radius with mental strength too. The fog had greatly reduced the range of danger detection of the team, and by the time the enemy emerged, the latter would already be only a few hundred meters away. Such a distance was considered very short for ordinary warriors and mages, let alone the massive offensive spells. Usually, the enemies would appear right before them after they cast just one offensive spell. The two types of alchemy colossuses collided forcefully again with incessant loud sounds. The alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam Kingdom soon got the upper hand and suppressed the grey alchemy colossuses ferociously. However, at this moment, one of the alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam Kingdom suddenly stopped. Not only did it disturb their own battle tactics, it also turned around to attack its companions. Watch out, it's a mental spell. There are still enemies in the thick fog, Archbishop Martin cautioned as he raised his staff, after which a pillar of holy light descended out of thin air and landed on the berserk alchemy colossus of the Rotterdam. It was a ray of light of salvation, which could dispel fear, confusion, charm, and other various negative spiritual influences on the target. As the pillar landed, the alchemy colossus that was attacking its companions immediately stopped all of its movements. Following Archbishop Martin's movements, the holy light priests around him raised their staffs together and chanted a short verse of a prayer, scattering the light of salvation onto the other alchemy colossuses that were fighting the enemies. The light of salvation was not only used to dispel negative spiritual influences, but also served to strengthen one's willpower and faith. After the light of salvation vanished, a layer of holy light halo faintly engulfed the massive bodies of the alchemy colossuses. The controllers of the alchemy colossus gained a certain immunity to the negative mental spells for a while. At the same time, a bunch of corporeal vengeful spirits charged out of the thick fog, behind the erupting offensive spells while roaring. Although they were undead creatures of the lowest level inferior to skeletal warriors, they would have legendary level power once they condensed into physical form. Such entities were extremely immune to both magical and physical attacks. At the same time, they were also stronger in martial arts and necromagic. The changes in the alchemy colossus of the Rotterdam Kingdom just now were undoubtedly caused by them. If someone from another profession were to encounter those vengeful spirits, they would definitely have an extreme headache. When Lin Li first explored the Sky Castle, Master Cheyenne of the Manhwa family, who was a level 22 legendary mage, was so miserable after being put in a pathetic state by the vengeful spirits. However, at that time, the number of vengeful spirits was very low, and most of them were only ordinary vengeful spirits. Otherwise, Cheyenne probably wouldn't even have been able to reach the central tower. Now, with the awakening of the ghost, most of the vengeful spirits had clearly condensed into physical entities and become the strong corporeal vengeful spirits. Fortunately, the Brilliant Shrine was part of the expedition this time and could deal with the undead creatures, which was what they were good at. Otherwise, Lin Li would have to take action himself. According to the previous cooperation agreement, if the enemy appeared with undead creatures, it would be the Brilliant Shrine's duty to deal with them. When Archbishop Martin led the team of priests to give the alchemy colossuses some light of salvation, Prince Jeremiah waved his sword in his hand, and a group of Knights of Holy Light formed. They walked past the alchemy colossuses that were in battle and charged towards the corporeal vengeful spirits that had just emerged from the fog. There were 40 holy paladins that fought in the battle. They were divided into 4 teams, each led by a legendary level leader. The other knights were at level 18 or level 19. The 4 teams of knights were facing nearly 20 legendary level corporeal vengeful spirits. In terms of level alone, the holy paladins were at an absolute disadvantage. However, was that the truth? Although the knights had not been able to even sustain a single round in the battle against the Tower of Dusk, it was mainly because the latter was too strong, and the other reason was that they had underestimated their enemies. However, it was different for the holy paladins to take on those vengeful spirits. Holy light magic itself had a great restraining effect on undead creatures, and although they did not specialize in the holy light magic like the priests did, they still had high attainments in it. Moreover, the equipment of the holy paladins, such as their armor that was equipped with the power of light, which had great resistance against necromagic, and the holy cross spear that could emit light of purification, also provided them with great assistance. Therefore, even though they were all facing legendary level corporeal vengeful spirits, the holy paladins had the absolute upper hand right from the start of the battle. The 40 holy paladins split into 4 teams of 10, each led by their legendary level captain, and charged towards the corporeal vengeful spirits. They didn't stop at one place, but instead urged their llama beasts to shuttle through the vengeful spirits continuously, cutting them in no time. Although there were only 10 holy paladins in each squad, they seemed to have formed a chain of light, with their rapid movements, trapping the corporeal vengeful spirits on the ground. Every holy light knight was covered with a layer of holy light, which they scattered to the first corner of the battlefield during their movements to and fro, thus forming a light domain with powerful purification power. There was an incomparable soul-cleansing music playing above the light domain. It was the holy light battle song, which was exactly the origin of the name of their battle formation. Under the shroud of the battle song, the vengeful spirit entities seemed to have lost their ability to cast necromagic spells. At the same time, their power was being purified by the power of light. They roared and frantically attacked every holy paladin that moved past them, but they still couldn't avert their fate, destruction. Those corporeal vengeful spirits continuously went up in black smoke that drifted away and disappeared into the holy light, as if they were burned by fire. Every wisp of black smoke that dissipated meant the loss of a portion of the vengeful spirit's power. That was the powerful purifying power of the holy light battle song. Even if the holy paladins did not attack, the corporeal vengeful spirits would not last long simply under the purification of the holy light battle song. Although they had become partners with the brilliant shrine first, the people of the Rotterdam did not know much about the power of the latter, nor did they bother to understand it. In their opinion, the brilliant shrine was essentially just a religion, and their being able to be called the top power in the world of Anral was all because they had a lot of devotees. Besides, having more devotees did not mean that they were stronger. Even a farmer who grew crops could become a devotee. So what if they had plenty of them? In fact, not to mention the brilliant shrine, the people of the Rotterdam even despised and looked down on the Supreme Council, which was said to be above all else in Anral. In their view, alchemy was the future of the world, and theurgy and magic would eventually be eliminated. The only time the people of the Rotterdam saw the strength of the brilliant shrine was during the minor conflict they had with the Tower of Dusk. The defeat of the holy paladins made them certain of their previous judgment. Their previous scruples were mainly because of the legendary powerhouses of the brilliant shrine, especially Archbishop Martin, who was at the peak of the legendary realm. Another reason was that it involved international relations. However, as Donald watched the group of holy paladins defeat the nearly 20 corporeal vengeful spirits that were at the legendary level with a single blow, he couldn't help but change his opinion despite knowing that it was because of the restraining effects. Indeed, the people of the Rotterdam were not undead creatures, and the purification power of the holy light magic did not have that much restraint on them. However, the holy paladins managed to create a powerful light domain, using the holy light battle song. Just like the magical domains of mages, the light domain already involved the use of non-magical power. Hence, it was not as simple as restraining and purifying undead creatures. As a legendary mage who was at the peak of the legendary realm, Donald definitely knew how powerful and useful a magical domain was. Mages created magical domains using their understanding of the laws. Magical domains were spaces that they had complete control over, and they would greatly strengthen their power while suppressing the power of the enemies in the domain. Generally speaking, among the many professions in Anral, only legendary mages could create their own domains. The clergymen of the Brilliant Shrine could actually be considered a type of mage, except that unlike mages that used elemental laws, they used holy light laws. Professions like paladins, sword sages, and assassins were all in pursuit of pushing their power to the limits. Even if they reached the legendary realm, they wouldn't be able to create a magical domain. On the other hand, a paladin of the Brilliant Shrine could create a light domain through the use of battle formations. While possessing great combat power, he could also gain the many benefits brought by the light domain. That was simply something that would leave others green with envy. The light domain created by the 40 holy paladins suppressed nearly 20 legendary level corporeal vengeful spirits. Its power was at least level 22 or level 23. The 40 holy light knights were only a portion of the holy light knights of the Brilliant Shrines team. If all the holy light knights were to be deployed, the light domain created would probably already reach the legendary level 1. Most importantly, Donald thought about another aspect that was beyond the Sky Castle. In the Brilliant Shrine, the Holy Light Knights could be considered a regular force, as there were Holy Light Knights stationed in almost every diocese. If thousands or tens of thousands of Holy Light Knights were to be sent out, what kind of light domain would be created? Of course, Donald also knew that the Holy Light Knights that joined in the exploration this time were definitely elites. If they were ordinary Holy Light Knights, it would be hard to deduce if they could even achieve that. Hence, they did have concerns, but they were not worried or fearful. Just like before, the team from the Tower of Dusk was leisurely, guarding the group at the back and making comments about the intense battle in front of them. The mages of the team, especially the greenhorns who had just joined, behaved properly and listened to the explanations of their leader, Alan, about how they should deal with the Holy Light Knights. Lin Li did not express any shock or surprise at the Holy Light Knights' use of the Holy Light Battle Song battle formation. In fact, when he visited the Brilliant Shrine in the past, he had also studied the battle formation of the Holy Light Battle Song. Pope Rosario had also explained to him in detail about the Holy Guardian battle formation of the Holy Paladins. Many Death Knights were attracted to join the Tower of Dusk's team, because one of the Death Knights under Lin Li became a Retribution Knight. Now, their army had expanded to more than 100 members who had all been transformed into Holy Death Knights. The Death Knights were born with the ability to get into infinite killing formations, which was similar to the Holy Light Battle Song. They could create a killing domain, in which the enemies would be affected by negative influences such as chaos, fear, and so on. Lin Li had tried to teach the Holy Death Knights the Holy Guardian battle formation that he had just learned. However, the outcome was not ideal. Although the Holy Death Knights could manipulate divine power, they still felt rather powerless when they were practicing the Holy Guardian battle formation. Thinking that the Holy Paladins around Pope Rosario had legendary level abilities, Lin Li reckoned that his Holy Death Knights would probably have to become Retribution Knights in order to use the Holy Guardian battle formation perfectly. Hence, the 40 Death Knights that he had brought along to explore the Sky Castle were all already at the peak of level 19. He hoped that they could devour more soulfire and produce more Retribution Knights. Soon, the corporeal vengeful spirits were turned into ashes that were scattered away under the purification of the Holy Light Battle Song, while the Grey Alchemy Colossus were also turned into pieces by the Alchemy Colossuses of the Rotterdam Kingdom. After the battle ended, the expedition resumed its advance towards the interior of the Sky Castle. However, after having experienced that battle just now, everyone became much more cautious. When Lin Li first came to explore the Sky Castle, neither he nor the rest of the team had encountered any enemies blocking their way to the Sky Castle. It was because they had split up the moment they entered the Sky Castle. The Sky Castle was large, and the vengeful spirits and alchemy colossuses were all scattered on the streets of the Sky Castle. Besides, at that time, the vengeful spirits and alchemy colossuses seemed to have been somewhat restricted in their range of movement. However, there was clearly a huge change this time. When the expedition stepped into the street, the vengeful spirits and alchemy colossuses of the entire Sky Castle had probably already gathered there. It was 80% certain that it was done by the ghost. The expedition would encounter a large number of enemies that swarmed towards them from the thick fog almost every time they covered a distance of less than 20 meters. Fortunately, they would not pose too much of a threat to the team. In fact, the team from the Tower of Dusk was not always that idle. As they gradually delved deeper, enemies also continuously surged out from the forks on both sides of the street. There were plenty of enemies who also rushed out from behind the team. Perhaps they had rushed there afterwards, or perhaps they had deliberately sneaked there. All in all, the Tower of Dusk could not just stand by the side and do nothing. Seeing that situation, Donald, Canber, and Jeremiah of the Brilliant Shrine were all secretly gloating. From their point of view, the Tower of Dusk had chosen to stay at the back of the team because they wanted to reserve their power, and also because they were not confident in themselves. However, there were now enemies behind the team which did not seem to be any easier to deal with than the ones at the front. While those in front only needed to keep advancing, those at the back had to defend themselves from the enemies and ensure that they did not stray too far from the main team. Otherwise, they might be surrounded by the enemies. With those thoughts in mind, Donald and Jeremiah unanimously requested for their subordinates to speed up in advancing. It was not that they really had to shake the Tower of Dusk off. However, if there were to be a slight disconnection and lag in the team, it would definitely cause a lot of trouble for the Tower of Dusk too. However, in the face of such a situation, the Tower of Dusk remained unhurried, and the ones who truly fought the enemy were their greenhorn mages. What the Death Knights did was to continuously devour the soul fire of the vengeful spirits. The other legendary powerhouses rarely took action too. They only intervened when the mages were in danger of losing their lives. Otherwise, they wouldn't bother even if the mages were injured. It seemed a bit cruel, but how could the mages gain experience without cruelty? That was what humans were like. If they were continuously protected by legendary powerhouses, they would probably continue making mistakes. Since they would not die, why would they bother improving? In the end, they would forever be stuck at a bottleneck. However, even though their purpose was to train the mages, the team from the Tower of Dusk's advancement speed wasn't affected. No matter how they increased their speed, and regardless of what kind of enemies emerged from behind, the team from the Tower of Dusk was still keeping the same distance from the rest. After doing that a few times, Donald finally gave up. After all, there was still a price to pay for pushing forward forcefully. At the same time, Donald couldn't help but be shocked at the strength shown by the Tower of Dusk. Were they really a small force that came from a nameless place? He was well aware that while the enemies at the back might not be much stronger than the ones in front, it was not an easy task to behave like the Tower of Dusk did. The enemies that appeared at the back of the team were the same as in the front. There were gray alchemy colossuses and legendary level corporeal vengeful spirits. However, at the front, the Rotterdam Kingdom was dealing with the alchemy colossuses, while the Brilliant Shrine was dealing with the vengeful spirits. The two forces were working together to advance at that speed. Meanwhile, the Tower of Dusk at the back was only relying on the power of the mages to destroy the enemy while keeping up with the frontline troops. Hence, they couldn't help but be shocked. It was not that that was a remarkable feat, but rather because of the party that did it. If it had been a team of the Brilliant Shrine, Donald definitely wouldn't have been too shocked, but the Tower of Dusk could not compare to the Brilliant Shrine at all. Seems like I have to find out more from Archbishop Martin about the origin of the Tower of Dusk when I have the time. Actually, Donald was not the only one. Even Archbishop Martin was incredibly shocked after seeing the Tower of Dusk's performance. Actually, he only knew about Lin Li, and he did not know much more about the strength of the Tower of Dusk than the rest did. Archbishop Martin agreed that Lin Li was a genius, a demon, and a monster. Well, he had reached the peak of the legendary level when he was in his early 20s. However, was genius contagious? The Tower of Dusk had only been established for a mere 3 or 4 years, yet its group of mages behaved as if they had been nurtured for decades. Of course, it was impossible that they had been nurtured for that long. As such, they could only say that the mages were all geniuses. Has there been a surge in geniuses in the Breezy Plains lately? Why haven't I heard of magical geniuses previously? In other people's opinion, everyone would definitely bring their most elite manpower during a dangerous operation, like exploring the Sky Castle. No one would have expected Lin Li to bring a bunch of greenhorns and treat the Sky Castle as a place for training soldiers. Of course, in reality, the so-called greenhorns would probably be considered core elites in other forces. The mages destroyed numerous gray alchemy colossuses, and killed several legendary level corporeal vengeful spirits. Everyone was probably envious of the Tower of Dusk for having such a powerful group of mages. However, Lin Li secretly shook his head as he still couldn't be satisfied with the performance of the greenhorn mages. Still, Lin Li also knew that such things could not be rushed. No one would truly grow up after just going through a battle. He had come this far after experiencing plenty of battles of various scales, during which he continuously acquired experience to grow to his current level. All in all, the expedition was advancing quite smoothly, though as the enemies continued to surge, the battles gradually became more intense. They did not even stop for a moment. However, the enemies were not enough to pose a real threat to the three forces that had jointly formed the expedition. In fact, as they passed by a few special buildings, they still had the energy to go in and search. However, the gains they made were somewhat unsatisfactory. The expedition was like an indestructible chariot that was advancing forward slowly, but surely. Hence, they got rid of all the obstacles along the way. They even thought that the Immortal King's Sky Castle was no big deal. Indeed, in the battle that was continuously advancing, the team of the Brilliant Shrine was barely injured. Even if they accidentally sustained a minor injury, they would quickly recover with the priest's treatment. On the Rotterdam Kingdom's side, they would only occasionally encounter a small obstruction in the alchemy colossuses, which would be repaired quickly. Even the greenhorn mages of the Tower of Dusk began to sustain fewer injuries, perhaps because they had really improved after the training. Of course, That did not mean that they had passed, it just meant that they had gotten familiar with fighting the alchemy colossuses and corporeal vengeful spirits. The battle experience was still somewhat superficial, and could only become theirs after in-depth summation and absorption. However, just when everything seemed to be going in the right direction, the fog in front of them suddenly seemed to have started boiling as it began rolling violently. Next, there were no enemies, but a large amount of powerful magic that poured out of the fog. Besides, there was more than just necromagic, there were also all sorts of powerful elemental magic spells. All of the magic spells that suddenly descended formed a massive magic storm, where all kinds of magical rays intertwined together, appearing splendid and full of deadly danger. Although the people in the expedition were somewhat relaxed because of the smooth advancement, they were, after all, the elites of the various forces. Hence, they immediately reacted to the magic storm. The alchemy colossuses that were walking in the front immediately activated their magical defensive arrays. The large shields formed a solid dam to block the impact of the magic storm. On the brilliant shrine's side, the priests had also begun chanting prayers with devout expressions. As they did, a hole formed in the fog that was spreading out in the sky. A pillar of light pierced through the gap and fell into the incessant magic storm. With each pillar of light that fell, the power of the magic storm was significantly weakened. Soon, the joint efforts of the alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam kingdom and the priests caused the magic storm to dissipate. Upon sight of the elemental magic spells, the people from the Rotterdam kingdom and the brilliant shrine immediately began to suspect that there were other forces exploring the sky castle. It was because all this time, the enemies they had encountered were vengeful spirits and some other undead creatures, plus the grey alchemy colossuses, and those enemies could not use elemental magic spells. Charge in and see who on earth dares to be so rude, Prince Canber commanded in exasperation before Donald even said anything. Upon hearing Prince Canber's command, everyone from the Rotterdam kingdom strode towards the fog without the slightest hesitation. The members of various professions at the back also got into a battle formation and followed the alchemy colossuses closely. The sudden attack was unbearable for the people of the brilliant shrine, let alone the arrogant people of the Rotterdam kingdom. After Prince Canber's command, Prince Jeremiah of the brilliant shrine pointed his sharp sword to the front and ordered the Holy Light Knights to go all out. Although Archbishop Martin vaguely sensed that something was wrong, he couldn't say anything at this time. He could not possibly let the Holy Light Knights take the risk alone. Hence, he waved his staff and led the group of priests to follow behind the Holy Light Knights, heading in the direction the magic storm had come from. The Tower of Dusk was an exception. Not only did Lin Li not make his subordinates take the risk and follow the teams of the two forces, but he waved his hand and got the team to come to a complete stop. Although the fog hindered their vision, Lin Li could still judge based on his understanding of the map that there should be an avenue square in front, with one of the 36 magic towers in the middle. Soon, the sounds of fierce battle could be heard from the dense fog in front. The sounds of all sorts of magical explosions seemed to have become one, and magic spells could be seen being shot out of the fog randomly from time to time. At the same time, the emanating fog actually gradually became thinner. In just a few breaths, the magic tower and the avenue square were displayed clearly. However, the barrier formed by the thick fog could still be seen around the avenue square. In the middle of the square, the teams from the brilliant shrine and the Rotterdam kingdom that were surrounding the magic tower were engaged in a very fierce battle with the enemy. Archbishop Martin from the brilliant shrine was holding a strangely shaped key, which Archbishop Martin used to unlock the magic tower. However, at this moment, the key was continuously radiating an invisible power, creating a strange force field that stopped the thick fog from reaching the square. The ones who were fighting against the brilliant shrine and the Rotterdam kingdom were a bunch of ghost mages with illusory figures that were similar to corporeal vengeful spirits. They did not have fixed figures or clear faces. The ghost mages, whose bodies seemed to be made of pure mana, were not wearing any magic robes or holding any staffs. However, they could cast powerful magic spells with a wave of their hands. Strictly speaking, the ghost mages were not undead creatures, but mana imprinted with a spiritual brand, left behind after the death of high elves. As the years passed, the spiritual brand in the mana was supposed to gradually wear off and eventually disappear. However, they were brought to the chaos of time and space in the world that was far away from Anral by the Sky Castle. Hence, they were preserved. The awakening of High Lord Osric also caused the spiritual brands of the mana to be activated, thus giving them a new life and turning them into ghost mages that were composed of mana. Although they were called ghost mages, they were purely made up of mana. They were special life forms, just like elementals. The ghost mages could cast elemental magic spells, while being unafraid of the purifying power of the holy light magic. The power of each ghost mage could compare to the strength of a legendary mage. Although they couldn't create their own magical domain yet, they could instantly cast all magic spells below their level. Besides, the power of nearly 200 ghost mages casting magic spells together was shocking. The people of the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom were clearly in the midst of a bitter battle at this point. Fortunately, Archbishop Martin had the key to the magic tower and could temporarily push the fog out of the square. Facing a bunch of remotely attacking mages, they were in a situation that was even more dangerous. Now that there was no more fog, the two parties finally faced a proper battle. Besides, the legendary powerhouses of the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom had also joined the battle. After all, the two forces of the expedition team also had plenty of legendary powerhouses, as well as those who were at the peak of the legendary realm, like Archbishop Martin and Donald. When they truly unleashed their full power, the situation on the battlefield immediately changed. The ghost mages that could instantly cast magic spells and were below level 20 were indeed quite a headache. However, once there were a few actual legendary mages who displayed their magical domains, the ghost mages would immediately lose their advantage. The ghost mages so-called equaling the legendary mages was only relative to those below the legendary realm. Without their own magical domains, they were definitely still very different from legendary mages. Faced with such a situation, it was reasonable to say that the Tower of Dusk's team should have caught up as well. Even if they did not join in the battle, they at least could not stray too far from the team. However, Lin Li simply shook his head to turn down Master Basil and Alan's inquiry. Hence, his team remained still. Due to the group of ghost mages at the back, Lin Li discovered a very strange figure, which seemed to be a skeletal undead creature. However, it looked rather small. In reality, if Lin Li hadn't felt that special mana fluctuation from such a distance, they probably would not have been able to discover that fist-sized monster. Of course, even if the monster was discovered, they were simply too far away. Even with Lin Li's eyesight, it would still be impossible to see clearly what that thing was. On the battlefield, the joint force of the people from the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom seemed to have gotten the upper hand, and it seemed that completely destroying the ghost mages would only be a matter of time for them. However, at this moment, the creature that had been staying behind the ghost mages suddenly darted out and flew towards a spot that was in the air above the heads of the ghost mages. With the appearance of that thing, the fierce attack that had pushed the ghost mages into a desperate situation was instantly disintegrated by an unparalleled power. At this moment, the people from the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom finally discovered that such a strange thing had actually appeared on the battlefield. After seeing the appearance of that creature, almost no one found it exceptional, as it was just a skeleton. However, no one knew what living being it belonged to. That skeleton was only the size of a human fist, and its every bone was so slender that it seemed as if it would break at the slightest touch. The overall shape resembled that of a rat's skeleton. However, there was a tiny pair of wings on its back. Could it be the skeleton of some kind of bat? However, a terrifying wave of mana fluctuation suddenly erupted from the tiny skeleton. Even the legendary powerhouses like Archbishop Martin and Donald couldn't help but find it hard to face the mana fluctuation. Immediately afterwards, countless powerful legendary level elemental magic spells were cast from the tiny skeleton. Before the people could even react, they formed a massive magic torrent, which was more than 1,000 times stronger than the magic storm cast by the ghost mages. It made them feel like they were facing doomsday. At the same time, the ghost mages did not give up the chance to take revenge, as they all cast level 19 magic spells that were even more powerful. Although they were only level 19 magic spells, the continuous casting of magic spells by nearly 200 ghost mages was still extremely terrifying. For a while, the people of the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom were caught off guard by the peculiar skeleton that emerged from nowhere. Even though they outnumbered the enemies and had massive alchemy colossuses, they still felt like a helpless boat, which would be smashed to pieces by a massive wave any time in the endless magic torrent. In fact, that was exactly the case. Although the 10 alchemy colossuses that were standing right in front of the team had already activated their magic defensive arrays, that was clearly still not enough. The magic shields that could originally withstand the ghost mage's magic storm were shattered with a thud in less than a second in the magic torrent. Then, the massive alchemy colossuses were devoured by the magic torrent and burst into flames that shot to the sky amidst the roar of countless magic spells. The precious magical metals that the people from the Rotterdam used in their alchemy colossuses did not allow them to survive for long. However, there were fortunately 10 alchemy colossuses holding up the front, giving the crowd in the back a slight chance. The alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam linked arms and jointly cast a more solid defensive force field as they struggled to resist the impact of the magic torrent. The team that was protected in the defensive force field also kept casting defensive magical spells to reduce the burden on the alchemy colossuses, while paying attention to each other's condition fearfully. Even a single tiny spark that suddenly burst from the body of an alchemy colossus could frighten them to death. On the other side, the team of the Brilliant Shrine was similarly in a terrible situation. Using the Holy Light battle song, the Holy Light Knights managed to suppress the dozens of ghost mages, even though they managed to jump towards their own team as fast as they could after detecting danger. 10 odd Holy Light Knights at the back were still devoured by the magic torrent. If Archbishop Martin had not instantly gone to rescue them, the Holy Light Knights would have suffered even greater losses. The priests of Brilliant Shrine had already jointly cast the Eternal Light, after which an incomparably holy curved curtain of light appeared at the front of the group, protecting them. The moment the light curtain was formed, a huge, deafening magic torrent slammed into the light curtain with a loud bang that seemed to shatter heaven and earth. Although the light curtain appeared distorted, the good thing was that it finally blocked the magic torrent. However, everyone could tell how hard of a time those priests had while holding on. In fact, some of them were even bleeding from their ears and nostrils. How did that happen? Their power is definitely not comparable to the pinnacle of the legendary realm. No legendary mage can continuously cast legendary level magic spells so freely without restraint. The magic torrent, composed of condensed legendary magic spells, is stronger than the joint forces of 100 legendary mages, facing the skeletal monster of unknown origins and the magic torrent that was made of condensed legendary level magic. Even the legendary powerhouses like Archbishop Martin and Donald couldn't help but be a little fearful. Although they were also at the peak of the legendary level, they felt that they were like a baby facing an adult, powerless with no means to resist. Archbishop Martin, what should we do now? Asked Prince Jeremiah, who had turned pale at this moment. Even though he was a paladin who had power that was at the peak of the legendary level, it was his first time encountering such a situation. Join forces with the people of the Rotterdam and retreat. I hope that we will be able to retreat safely after regrouping with the Tower of Dusk. Archbishop Martin kept a straight face and did not show the fear within him at all, because he knew that once he revealed his panic, the team of the Brilliant Shrine would truly be over. The Tower of Dusk. Damn it! Where are the people of the Tower of Dusk? Why aren't they following us? At this moment, Prince Jeremiah finally discovered that the people of the Tower of Dusk were still outside the square and did not catch up from the beginning of the battle until now. When Archbishop Martin made a decision, Donald from the Rotterdam did so as well. It was not that they shared some telepathic connection. In fact, they just had no choice. Wait for the enemy to run out of mana. That'd be a joke. By the time the mana in the huge magic torrent ran out, the legendary mages would probably be squeezed dry from defending. Donald was almost certain that if that went on, the ones to be destroyed first would be them. It couldn't be helped. The enemy was simply barbaric and tyrannical. No technique was involved, and the oppression was just done with brute force. Actually, when the people from the Brilliant Shrine and Rotterdam were dealing with the corporeal vengeful spirits and alchemy colossuses, they similarly suppressed them. However, they were now the ones being suppressed. Hence, anyone with a brain would realize that the only chance now was to try to join forces with the Brilliant Shrine and fight the enemy's magic torrent together. That was not all. They also had to join forces with the Tower of Dusk. After all, there was also a group of mages on the Tower of Dusk's side, which was considered a force. Fortunately, in the previous battle, the teams from the Brilliant Shrine and Rotterdam were not too far from each other. While desperately resisting the impact of the magic torrent, the two teams slowly seemed to be closing in together like snails. They were now going against an incomparably massive pressure. Any slight negligence would cause everyone to be finished. Perhaps even a few legendary powerhouses that were at the pinnacle of the realm might not be able to escape. As soon as the two teams met, an alchemy colossus on the side of the Rotterdam kingdom became paralyzed after an explosion due to an overload. Upon sight of that, the people from the Rotterdam kingdom instantly broke out in a cold sweat because they were incredibly frightened. If they had been slightly late, everyone in the team would have truly been finished. The two teams united their defense, and the pressure they were under, when defending, indeed reduced. The alchemist from the destroyed alchemy colossus could only escape because the machine was paralyzed. However, his expression showed he was completely overwhelmed with panic. Archbishop Martin and Donald exchanged opinions and began commanding their teams to retreat slowly. However, this time, the difficulty of defending had somewhat eased up, and they no longer retreated that slowly. Finally, the teams retreated to the edge of the square. Even though they did not take too much time, everyone felt like they had spent a century doing so. At this moment, the group of mages from the Tower of Dusk had already gotten ready after receiving Lin Li's orders. When the teams from the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam kingdom retreated, The mages united to form a magic net array, and jointly cast defensive spells to share some of the burden. With the addition of the mages of the Tower of Dusk, Archbishop Martin and Donald, the two powerhouses at the pinnacle of the legendary realm, were finally able to take their hands off the defense. After trying to cast offensive spells a few times, they finally walked towards Lin Li helplessly because they discovered that the enemy's defenses were just as strong as their attack. Their instantaneous defensive magic spells were cast one after another. They could not break through at all. Master Flick, do you know what's going on? The other party obviously doesn't have the aura of the sanctuary realm. Why does it have such a strong mana? Archbishop Martin still couldn't figure out what the enemy was. It was clearly only at the peak of the legendary level, yet it was not on the same level as him at all. At the peak legendary level, being able to instantly cast legendary level magic spells was not considered much, but being able to cast endless legendary level magic spells instantly was too terrifying. Facing such a frightening enemy, Archbishop Martin had lost almost all hope of exploring the Sky Castle. However, the problem was that, given the current situation, it seemed that being able to retreat safely was also an extravagant wish. The only way to leave the Sky Castle was through the teleportation portal. However, the teleportation portal wouldn't take everyone away at once. Since there were so many of them, they could only be sent away in batches. However, the three forces could only resist the insane attacks of the enemies by uniting. The last ones to leave would be the most unlucky. How could they retreat then? President Flick, why did the Tower of Dusk stay still at the back without doing anything while we were fighting hard at the front? Donald was extremely displeased with the Tower of Dusk's behavior. Hence, he questioned Lin Li furiously as soon as he saw him. The team from the Rotterdam lost 11 alchemy colossuses in a short while, which was absolutely a massive loss. Besides, in Donald's opinion, although the strength of the Tower of Dusk was not enough to change the situation even if they joined the battle, they could at least share some of the burden and relieve their pressure. Perhaps they would not have had to lose those alchemy colossuses then. Moreover, when the three forces discussed cooperation previously, Lin Li had also mentioned that he had explored the Sky Castle before. Donald couldn't help but suspect if there was a conspiracy behind the Tower of Dusk's decision to stay in the back. He wondered if Lin Li had long found out about the existence of the enemy and planned to let the enemy kill them. Of course, although he was incomparably heartbroken about the losses that his team had suffered, Donald still stayed a little level-headed and did not voice out his conjecture. Otherwise, he would probably have fallen out with the Tower of Dusk. Upon hearing the words of Archbishop Martin and Donald, Lin Li did not have any special expression on his face. He looked at the battle taking place in front of him, and calmly said, "The Tower of Dusk is a small force. How can we not be careful? That's an elemental dragon. You are a major force, you can ignore it, but I'm not so idiotic as to take my people to go toe-to-toe against it. An elemental dragon." Upon hearing that, the faces of Archbishop Martin and Donald grew sullen. Although they had never seen an elemental dragon before, they knew quite a bit about the legends of the elemental dragon, which was the most powerful existence of the ancient Wyrm clan, and mastered the four major elements. Although they were in disbelief, they couldn't help but believe the truth after comparing the actual elemental dragon with the legends. The endless and massive mana, as well as the infinite legendary level magic spells that could be launched instantly, were clearly only at the peak of the legendary realm. Other than the elemental dragon that was depicted in legends, they could not think of any other creature that would possess such terrifying power. However, knowing that the enemy was an elemental dragon did not seem to result in any changes to the current situation. In fact, it made them feel even more hopeless because they knew that no matter how hard they tried to persist, they still could not exhaust the mana of the elemental dragon. They did not continue questioning Lin Li, and instead returned to their respective teams. Despite knowing how terrifying the enemy was, they could not just give up, could they? The only thing to feel fortunate about was that the elemental dragon was only at the peak of the legendary level. Although that made them feel that they could not win, it was, after all, still below the sanctuary realm. Hence, they might get a chance at changing the situation. Of course, they knew that the chance was slim. There were no signs of the intense battle easing up. Although the pressure that each force suffered had decreased after regrouping, they were still unable to change the fact that they were in a passive position, where they were getting beaten up. The elemental dragon that was flying in midair might be just a ridiculous skeleton, but the power contained in its skeleton brought about infinite horror. The four great elements, the annihilation flames, extreme frost, meteorite disaster, and infinite storm, displayed their most terrifying forms under the manipulation of the elemental dragon, making them feel hopeless. The entire Sky Castle seemed to be trembling with the roaring magic spells. The elemental dragon was casting incredibly powerful top-tier legendary magic spells like they were ordinary spells. There was barely any time lag between them, as they continuously blasted above the magical defense of the expedition. Apart from defending, there was nothing else the expedition could do. They were enduring the endless offensive spells with all their might, as if they were struggling in an apocalyptic disaster that was a complete ravage. With its infinite mana, the elemental dragon did not have to think about the consumption of mana. There was no need for it to consider any technique or strategy. It was just using the highest mana output to display the strongest offensive spells, suppressing the opponents mercilessly. Under the lead of the elemental dragon's element domain, the ghost mages seemed to have been injected with stimulants as they bombarded the expedition with the strongest magic spells they could cast. Even though their power was far inferior to the elemental dragons, the draining of the expedition's defensive power, caused by the combined power of nearly 200 or so ghost mages, was similarly astonishing. After sustaining the attacks for a few moments, they had no choice but to start replacing the magical crystals of the alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam. Even if they used legendary magical crystals as the power source, they would never be able to last long with such a huge consumption rate. Besides, due to the overdraft, the alchemy colossuses began to experience all sorts of problems, and no one knew when they would suddenly collapse. It was the same for the humans. The priests of the Brilliant Shrine had been maintaining that intensity of spell casting, hence, their bodies had also ended up in a state of overloading. Many priests were gritting their teeth and persisting. However, blood was continuously oozing out from their eyes, mouths, and noses. They all seemed to be in a terrible state. The problems appearing in the alchemy colossuses could be resolved with repairs. The humans needed treatment as well. However, the current situation left them with no time to rest at all. Although the mages of the Tower of Dusk joined the battle later, and opted for a defensive stance from the moment they joined the battle, it did not mean that it was any easier for them. Through the magic net array, the mages combined Evrion's power, and they jointly reached the peak legendary level. However, it was still extremely inferior compared to the elemental dragon. In fact, they were considered pathetic and small. After this training, I believe that their comprehension of magic as well as their understanding of the magic net array will be greatly increased, Basil said to Lin Li while standing beside him and watching the mages who were struggling in the battle. However, he did not look worried at all. He knew that elemental dragons were indeed extremely terrifying, but he also knew that the young president beside him was even scarier. With a sanctuary powerhouse beside him, there was nothing for him to be worried about. Compared to the people of the Brilliant Shrine in Rotterdam, the mages of the Tower of Dusk were having a harder time as they were in a more dangerous situation. The teams of the Brilliant Shrine and Rotterdam Kingdom were defended by the legendary powerhouses, but the mages of the Tower of Dusk could only rely on themselves. Under Lin Li's orders, no one else except the mages joined the defense, simply because they wanted to let the mages get the most experience out of that situation. Actually, the Greenhorn mages were not the only ones who needed training. The other members of the mage team needed to be trained as well. There were many archmages who were at the peak of level 19 among the team of mages, and most of them were so-called infinitely close to the legendary realm. However, the root cause of Alan being the only one to advance to the legendary realm despite the good conditions that Lin Li had provided was the lack of training and actual battle experience. The environment for learning magic in the Dark Age was extremely harsh, yet it produced the god of mages Garesco, the three arbitrators, and batches of outstanding legendary figures. The mages now were not necessarily less talented than the people of that era. Besides, they also had a great learning environment. However, they could barely compare to the real legendary figures. The reason that the mages had fallen to such a pathetic state was because they lacked actual combat experience. How many battles had Garesco experienced in life to become the god of mages? Putting aside the battles that happened at the end of the Dark Age, the battles that he fought during his growth process in the Dark Age were absolutely unimaginable to the mages of that era. It was the same for the three arbitrators, High Priest Rog, and the various legendary figures of that era. Garesco had mentioned before that knowledge was the highest faith of mages, but books were not the only source of knowledge. Actual combat was not just another important way to gain knowledge, it was also one of the most important ways to test one's grasp of knowledge. Talent in magic was certainly one of the reasons Lin Li was able to have the achievements he had now. However, the various battles, where he'd been on the verge of death, also played an irreplaceable role. Without that experience, Lin Li would have probably only been an archmage with incredible talent in magic if he were to rely on his aptitude. Perhaps he could have worked hard for years and understand some logic before barely making it to the legendary realm. However, he could have dreamed on about the sanctuary realm. Although Lin Li didn't quite agree with their proposal to start a battle in the Sky Castle, he also firmly believed that fighting was the best and only way for mages to break through. The power displayed by the mages of the team had only reached the peak of the legendary realm through the magic net array. It could be said that it was of almost no help to Lin Li's exploration of the Sky Castle. The main reason that Lin Li chose to bring the mages there was so that they could have a chance to have an actual battle. Such an opportunity was rare in Anral. Hence, how could Lin Li ruin it? Even though the mages seemed to be in a difficult situation, and some of them had already been injured for various reasons, Lin Li would have a solution to treat them as long as they were not dead. In that case, there was no point in worrying. Lin Li was not concerned about the situation in the battlefield at all. He simply watched the mages gradually get tempered by the enemy's powerful attacks. In the battlefield, the attacks of the elemental dragon did not decrease at all. That was definitely a fact that made everyone feel helpless. Although there were barely any casualties among the people from the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom, all of them looked rather weak, as if they had been pushed to the limits. Inconcealable worry was written all over the faces of Archbishop Martin and Donald. They were well aware that the team was almost on the verge of collapsing. Perhaps, casualties would inevitably appear next, and that would signify the team's collapse. However, in the face of the elemental dragon, they could not find a chance to change the situation at all. They initially planned to counterattack with their remaining forces, but they were all devoted to putting up the defense. The only thing they could do was to try and sustain the attacks for a second longer. At this moment, they also noticed the performance of the Tower of Dusk's mages. To their surprise, the archmages were the ones who were fighting, and none of the legendary powerhouses of the Tower of Dusk joined them. 1. The author is using a different word, so it's a different creature from an elemental wyrm like Lin Li Xiaohua. Or the author changed the name. He's using two different terms for dragons, hence dragons and wyrms. It would be alright if the mages of the Tower of Dusk were behaving like they could win easily. However, the archmages seemed to also be in a difficult situation, and many of them were injured as well. That was rather puzzling. Could it be that Fulik already has a solution to the problem? As much as Archbishop Martin wanted to convince himself that the conjecture was true, he felt that it seemed to be unlikely, regardless of how he looked at it. However, if that was not the case, it did not seem likely that he would give up on the mages too. That seemed to have an effect on the situation. Archbishop Martin moved away from the group and walked towards Lin Li again. He anxiously asked Fulik, "Do you already have a solution? If you do, hurry and use it. If this goes on, we won't be able to endure for long." President Fulik, you should be aware of the current situation. If we continue to drag this on, I'm afraid that everyone will have to be left here except for us. If you really have a solution, I hope that you will stop holding back. Donald could also see the changes in the Tower of Dusk. Although he did not believe that Lin Li could resolve the crisis they were facing, he still had a glimmer of hope. Lin Li did not answer the two of them immediately, and instead looked at the mages. Perhaps, in the opinion of others, the mages were not behaving differently, but he could still tell that the mages had indeed improved greatly after a period of training. If they were to go on, they would be in trouble. Lin Li finally looked away and turned to look at the two who were incredibly anxious. He stepped forward gently, but he suddenly appeared above the battlefield. That change gave Archbishop Martin and Donald a great shock. The two of them were still waiting for Lin Li's reply, but they did not expect him to run straight to the battlefield. However, could the current situation be changed by a legendary powerhouse who was at the peak of the legendary realm? Truth be told, neither of them believed it. However, just as the two of them looked toward the battlefield where Lin Li was hovering in the air, they saw something that surprised both of them. Lin Li was calmly raising the Helios scepter in his hand while hovering in midair. He gently pointed the Helios scepter at the ghost mages, but that seemingly insignificant action made everyone present instantly feel that the entire Sky Castle seemed to have been lowered with the scepter before sinking abruptly. It was as if a heavy object had suddenly been placed on a boat. Immediately afterwards, something even more surprising happened. The distorted bodies of the ghost mages, which were extremely rampant so far, suddenly became blurry almost all at the same time. Just like green smoke that rose into the air, they dissipated silently in the breeze. The bodies of the nearly 200 ghost mages gradually became blurred and transparent before eventually disappearing without a sound. What kind of power is that? Those were ghost mages that had combat power that was not inferior to the legendary powerhouses. Everyone was astonished. They did not feel any mana fluctuations, nor did they hear Lin Li chant any incantations. He managed to make the nearly 200 ghost mages disappear with a gentle move of his scepter. That was simply beyond everyone's knowledge, and even the legendary powerhouses, Archbishop Martin and Donald, could not figure out what was going on. They could not imagine how Lin Li, who they thought was also a legendary powerhouse like them, could have such a peculiar power. They even felt a little terrified. Archbishop Martin and Donald were both legendary powerhouses, who were at the peak of the legendary realm. Although they were close to the sanctuary realm, They had yet to see that door to the sanctuary realm. They could be considered clueless about the power of the sanctuary realm, and that was the reason they were afraid. If they had a slight comprehension of the power of the sanctuary realm, they would not find the power that Lin Li used to be that peculiar. Although the ghost mages had combat power that was not inferior to the legendary mages, they were still not in the actual legendary realm. After all, their power came from High Lord Osric, not themselves. They could not use that power to comprehend and master the laws. That was the difference between them and legendary mages. They were unable to truly grasp the nomological power, or create their own magical domain. Those ghost mages were actually no different from ordinary archmages in terms of their realm. The only difference was that they had massive mana and a portion of laws that even they could not master. On the other hand, Lin Li was truly in the sanctuary realm, and he could really integrate himself into the world laws. Every wisp of mana came with the purest nomological power. He did not need to use any powerful magic spells to destroy the ghost mages. He just had to use his mastery of world laws to disintegrate the laws of the mana that they had condensed. Everything they had would lose the foundation to exist. This was the terrifying aspect of the sanctuary realm. To put it in a more exaggerated manner, if Lin Li were to accidentally show some of his mana, it would be enough to make an archmage lose his mana and die. However, the ghost mages were not the main point. What really caused big trouble for the expedition was the skeletal elemental dragon that was only the size of a fist. It was an elemental dragon that was at the peak of the legendary realm. It had terrifying power, which was probably comparable to the power of 100 legendary mages who were at the peak of the legendary realm. That kind of power was simply comparable to that of a sanctuary powerhouse. After destroying those ghost mages, Lin Li did not linger any longer. He flashed again and immediately arrived in front of the elemental dragon. Lin Li did not have any defensive spells, but the elemental dragon that had just bombarded the expedition actually stopped at this moment. The elemental dragon that had terrifying power actually became surprisingly quiet after Lin Li arrived. In fact, they could even sense a trace of fear from its body. Yes, fear. Although the elemental dragon was only a small skeleton that could not make any expressions, the expedition below, especially Archbishop Martin and Donald, could feel the sense of fear coming from it. Instead of being a proper ancient dragon, it actually went to become Osric's underling as a bunch of bones. Is that fun? Lin Li said calmly as he looked at the elemental dragon. As Lin Li finished speaking, the elemental dragon did not launch any attacks. Instead, it flapped its wings and surprisingly ran away like it did not have any backbone. However, before the elemental dragon could flee far, a palm formed from mana suddenly appeared in the void and grabbed the elemental dragon that was trying to escape. At this time, the elemental dragon no longer looked as ferocious and menacing as it had just now. It simply became a poor creature that was powerless and unable to retaliate. Lin Li then pointed the Helios scepter forward, and countless lightning pythons sprang up from the void with earth-shattering roars. They bombarded the elemental dragon continuously. They immediately darted around in the sky and lit up the entire space, and everyone couldn't help but want to close their eyes. Finally, when everything fell silent, the skeleton of the elemental dragon had already disappeared without a trace from the illusory hand made of mana, leaving behind only a nail-sized magical crystal that was glistening in the air. The elemental dragon that had forced everyone into a desperate situation just now had been wiped out, with no bones left. Upon sight of that scene, the members of the expedition standing on the ground were completely dumbfounded. In fact, they couldn't believe it at all. The illusory feeling was just like a dream. The elemental dragon was indeed very strong, as it had an inherent ability to have infinite mana and master countless powerful elemental magic spells. However, it was still only in the legendary realm. No matter how close it was to the sanctuary realm, and even if it was only a step away, it was actually still infinitely far away from the real sanctuary realm. The difference between the realms was not at all something that could be closed by the accumulation of mana. Although there had always been legends of the weak overpowering the strong in Anral, where magic shooters defeated archmages, and archmages defeated legendary mages, there were no legends of a legendary mage defeating a sanctuary powerhouse. That was because the difference between the legendary realm and the sanctuary realm was far greater than anyone could imagine. It was not only in terms of power, but also in terms of the mastery of laws, the familiarity with composition of the world, and the thorough use of mana. A true sanctuary powerhouse had already integrated himself into the world laws. Every place that a sanctuary powerhouse was in would become a natural magical domain that was composed of the world laws. The words and deeds of a sanctuary powerhouse represented the world laws. That was an ability that was only possessed by gods. Stepping into the sanctuary realm meant that one was already free from the limitations of mortals. Thus, They were no longer restrained by the world laws. It was no exaggeration to say that sanctuary powerhouses represented the strongest power in Anral. They could use all sorts of world laws freely, making the power of the world work for them. Apart from a few core laws, there was no longer anything that could bind them. All levels above the sanctuary realm were considered the realm of gods. In the long history of Anral, there were only a few people who were qualified to step into the realm above the sanctuary realm. For example, the god of mages Garesco, and the mythical immortal king. Looking at the young figure in the sky, Donald continuously yelled in his heart, "No, that's impossible. How could that be? That's an elemental dragon. An elemental dragon that's at the peak of the legendary realm." Donald couldn't believe what was happening in front of him. An elemental dragon that was at the peak of the legendary realm was actually destroyed so easily. Am I crazy? Or has this world gone mad? How could there be such power in this world? Of course, there was also the possibility that the young mage had already possessed the true power of the sanctuary realm. However, Donald clearly did not believe that. He would rather believe that the other party was just lucky enough to have encountered an elemental dragon that had something wrong with it, and had exploited the weakness of the elemental dragon through some method. At this moment, Camber, who was standing beside Donald, also had a look of shock on his face. He could not believe that a person he originally did not take seriously would suddenly reveal such unbelievably powerful strength. He recalled the words that he said when he wanted the Tower of Dusk to submit to the Rotterdam Kingdom the previous day. If Lin Li was really a sanctuary powerhouse, he would probably be dead. His power is definitely not his own. He must have mastered some magical equipment, or some secret technique to restrain the elemental dragon. That must be it. Camber could not stop persuading himself. Indeed, this must be the case. That cunning mage made his move so late because he wanted to create such a stir to show how powerful he is. In reality, he was just putting on a facade to create a deterrent so as to gain greater benefits in the exploration later. The arrogant people of the Rotterdam could never accept seeing others being stronger than themselves. Even if they saw it with their own eyes, they would have to come up with acceptable explanations for it in their own minds. Unlike the people from the Rotterdam Kingdom, Archbishop Martin would not dwell on it, although he was extremely astonished as well. From Archbishop Martin's point of view, the fact that Lin Li could possess such great strength might not be beneficial to the Brilliant Shrine. As one of the 4 archbishops of the Brilliant Shrine, he had heard Pope Rosario mention before that Felix might be the son of the Holy Light. Besides, Archbishop Martin also knew that although the matter had yet to be announced, he was more or less sure about it. The only problem was that the boy himself refused to admit it. However, facts were facts, and no matter how the true son of the Holy Light tried to deny it, he would never be able to change facts. Seems like I should report this matter to Pope Rosario as soon as possible. While the Supreme Council is still not doing anything, I will make this kid the son of the Holy Light. At the thought of it, Archbishop Martin began to get rather eager. He even thought of giving up the expedition. Although he was also a member of the Brilliant Shrine, Prince Jeremiah was not as excited about the matter as Archbishop Martin was. Instead, he was somewhat fearful. What a joke! It's an elemental dragon that is at the peak of the legendary realm, yet it was destroyed just like that. My paladins are so insignificant compared to them. Jeremiah was secretly thankful for Archbishop Martin's persuasion, which stopped him from stirring trouble with them. Otherwise, if he were to really anger Lin Li, he would be doomed. Regardless of the fact that he was a prince, who was also the leader of the Holy Light Knights, the elemental dragon, which was at the peak of the legendary realm, was already on par with the sanctuary powerhouse. Yet there was no tough or intense battle at all. It was simply twisted to death like an ant. No matter how arrogant and haughty Jeremiah was, he did not think that he was powerful enough to compete with the elemental dragon. Although he did not dare to think that Lin Li was a sanctuary powerhouse, he knew that the latter could definitely destroy him easily even if he was not a sanctuary powerhouse. Everyone watched in shock as Lin Li put away the nail-sized elemental dragon crystal and floated to the ground from the sky. Lin Li had expected everyone to react that way. However, the most important thing now was to explore the Sky Castle, and not to let them stay dumbfounded there. Seeing that they could not recover from the shock for a long time, Lin Li shook his head helplessly, and reminded Archbishop Martin, "Master Donald, I've already gotten rid of the elemental dragon. Do you think we should reorganize the team and continue advancing?" "Ah, yes, yes." Upon hearing Lin Li's reminder, everyone was finally enlightened. They were on the land of the Sky Castle, and there were plenty of things they had to do. Everyone suppressed their thoughts and reorganized the team. Those who had to be treated were treated, and the things that had to be repaired were also repaired. Actually, the greatest casualties were the 10-odd Holy Light Knights that the elemental dragon had suddenly attacked and killed, as well as the 11 alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam Kingdom that had been destroyed under the impact of the elemental dragon's magical elements. The 11 alchemy colossuses had long turned into broken pieces. There was no need for repairs at all. The only things that required repair were the problems caused by the overdraft of the alchemy colossus's power during the defensive battle. Although the people from the Rotterdam kingdom could not repair the alchemy colossuses as quickly as Angelano could, they fortunately had the adequate equipment. Most of the work consisted of replacing parts, which did not take much time. The Brilliant Shrine had plenty of methods for healing, which included healing potions and holy light magic. However, the priests had to overdraft their mental strength and mana in order to keep up with the defense. That was not something that could be healed by ordinary potions. Lin Li directly took out 2 boxes of potions from his ring of endless storm and handed them to Archbishop Martin. The potions were meant for restoring either mana or mental strength. One reason behind his decision to do so was that he had a good relationship with the Brilliant Shrine, and the other reason was that he didn't want to waste too much time there. After all, he still had to deal with Osric's ghost. Potions that restored mana and mental strength were far more valuable than recovery potions. Yet, Lin Li took out 2 boxes of them in one go. When Jeremiah saw those potions, he was suddenly reminded of what he'd said about giving the Tower of Dusk some potions to aid them. He immediately felt ashamed, and his face turned as red as a monkey's bottom. After a period of rest, the team finally regained some strength, and the 3 forces continued with the original plan. They entered the Avenue Square again. Archbishop Martin originally still had the key to the magic tower, in the middle of the square, but when he grabbed the key and tried to open the gate of the magic tower, he discovered that the magical 1000 contraption lock had already disappeared, yet the gate still could not be opened. Lin Li had a faint ominous hunch when he saw that situation also similarly caused Archbishop Martin and Donald to feel very disappointed. They initially thought that they could obtain the Immortal King's treasure without any problems since they had the key. However, now that the key had actually lost its effect, they had no choice but to worry and wonder if that was just a single phenomenon, or if that was the same in the entire Sky Castle. Despite being unable to open the gate of the magic tower, Archbishop Martin didn't insist on forcing his way in. After all, they had more important things to do in the Sky Castle, and if they were to get any treasures, it would only be coincidental. If they could obtain any, they would, of course, be glad, but if they could not, they would not cause any delay in what they had to do just because of it. Feeling rather regretful, the expedition left the magic tower and passed through the square to enter another street, once again walking into the endless fog. The thick fog was still affecting their senses and making it impossible for their mental strength to reach far. However, the strange thing was that the journey this time seemed to be much smoother than before, and there were very few enemies. The occasional vengeful spirits that appeared were also significantly weaker, and they did not encounter any legendary level enemies for a long time. Having just experienced a vicious battle, the people of the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom took everything for granted. They even somewhat enjoyed the smooth sailing journey. They felt that even if it was the Immortal King's Sky Castle, there wouldn't be psychotically powerful monsters everywhere. Since a powerful monster like the elemental dragon was destroyed, it should be normal for them to relax for a while. During the exploration, almost everyone felt the same. Actually, their thoughts were not wrong. After all, the elemental dragon was a perverted monster, and one of it was enough. The power of an elemental dragon combined with ghost mages was far beyond their imagination. They could not imagine what could be stronger than that. The descent of the Immortal King. However, Lin Li would never dare to have that thought. Even though he was now a true sanctuary powerhouse, he still had scruples about the notorious High Lord Osric. Compared to the people from the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom, Lin Li had a greater understanding of High Lord Osric. Perhaps Osric, who was once known as the Butcher, was just a mythical figure and a historical symbol to others. No matter how exaggerated it was, he still lacked a truly terrifying power. However, Lin Li was different from them. Ever since he obtained the Eternal Furnace in the beginning, until he explored the Sky Castle for the first time, followed by the High Lord Osric's mausoleum, he had gotten a clear understanding of the perversity of Osric, the mythical figure. The Immortal King's proud disciple had stood at the pinnacle of Anril a long time ago during the Dark Age. Although he strangely died an early death, he was no less powerful or talented than the Immortal King. He built the Eternal Furnace by imitating the Sky Castles. His creation even surpassed the Sky Castles in some ways. He created the perfect body, and created the ghost using 100,000 human souls. He intended to follow a different path to immortality than the Immortal King. If his plans could have gone smoothly, he might be really succeeded. Lin Li had some suspicion that the bizarre missing of the Immortal King had something to do with High Lord Osric. He still remembered that among the information he had, there seemed to be a mention of an argument between Osric and the Immortal King. as well as the message from Osric that was placed in the central tower. Facing such a terrifying enemy, Lin Li still lacked confidence despite having already stepped into the sanctuary realm. In fact, deep down, Lin Li was still willing to face the two sanctuary powerhouses, the Ice Blast Wyrm Sindera and the Flame Dragon Lothar. However, he did not want to face High Lord Osric. However, Lin Li had no choice. Did he really come to the Sky Castle this time to make all the gains in the Sky Castle his? He had obtained Osric's eternal furnace and his perfect body. There was no way he could resolve the hatred between them. Once High Lord Osric recovered his power and returned to Anral, the first thing he would do would be to destroy Lin Li and the Tower of Dusk so as to take the eternal furnace and the perfect body back. That was one of the most important reasons for Lin Li to set foot in the Sky Castle again. He hoped to get rid of the massive threat, while Osric had yet to fully recover. Lin Li dared to create trouble for Osric mainly because he had the control crystal, which he had obtained through the Immortal King's test when he'd first come to the Sky Castle, to fall back on. If he could really gain complete control of the Sky Castle through the control crystal, he would be confident in fighting Osric. However, judging from the signs he had seen after stepping into the Sky Castle again, he felt that the task was extremely difficult. Regardless of whether Osric had recovered fully or not, it was obvious that he had most likely gained control of a portion of the Sky Castle in the past 2 years. Although Lin Li had studied quite a bit of information about the Sky Castle, he was worlds apart from Osric in terms of knowledge of the Sky Castle. After all, back then, Osric had obtained most of the Immortal King's inheritance, and had also created the Eternal Furnace by replicating the Sky Castles. Clearly, he had a deep understanding of them. Even if Lin Li had the control crystal, he could not guarantee that he would be able to successfully gain control of the Sky Castle. Perhaps the only thing worth rejoicing over now was that Lin Li had quite a good grasp of the usage of the control crystal. Even if the operation failed this time, he could at least use the power of the control crystal to send himself and his subordinates back to Anral using the teleportation portal. Lin Li probably could not do anything to help the teams from the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom. Moreover, if things really developed to that stage, Lin Li would have no choice but to seek help from the 3 arbitrators. Lin Li was not a match for Osric with complete control of the Sky Castle at all. He was just a beginner of the Sanctuary Realm. Lin Li was so worried about Osric that he did not feel the slightest bit of joy, despite the fact that they could advance so smoothly and rapidly. Instead, he was much more worried about it. He was well aware that Osric and the Sky Castle would be a terrifying combination. Their current situation was just superficial safety, and in fact, it could be considered the calm before the storm. However, Lin Li did not mention that concern of his to the senior members of the other 2 forces. He knew that it was impossible for them to heed his warnings at this juncture, especially since a major crisis had been resolved. Just as Lin Li had thought, almost everyone from the teams from the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom were taking the smooth advancement for granted. The expedition pushed all the way to the interior of the Sky Castle, and they almost did not encounter any proper enemies. Besides, they also made plenty of gains from the buildings on both sides of the streets. That caused everyone to appear extremely excited, as if the Immortal King's treasures had already opened its doors to them. Yes, after overcoming the hurdle of the elemental dragon, everything has been so smooth. Look, aren't we about to enter the central area of the Sky Castle? The treasure of the Immortal King is waiting for us. This is going to be a joyous festival for us. The people from the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom were even somewhat regretful at this moment. Had they known that everything was going to go that well, they should have gone and explored all of the outskirts of the Sky Castle before exploring the central area. Of course, exploring that place first would be the same since all the valuable items were there anyway. However, at this time, the thick fog that filled the Sky Castle seemed to have suddenly rolled backwards in all directions like a tide. In the blink of an eye, the entire Sky Castle became rather clear. The people from the expedition were also shocked by that change. At the same time, they discovered that the fog was actually rolling towards the magic tower behind them, which they could still see. At this time, the magic tower was completely engulfed by the gray fog, making it look just like a massive gray pillar. However, this time, it did not last for long. Within a few breaths, the fog was completely devoured by the magic tower, revealing the true appearance of the tower again. However, the magic tower that had devoured the fog seemed to be significantly different from before. The vicinity of the tower lit up with the light of magic, and the large and complex mageths that spread all over the tower gave off a terrifying vibe of silence. At the top of the magic tower, a thick ink-like black fog was constantly being sprayed into the sky, forming an incomparably thick umbrella-shaped black cloud above the tower. It also continuously spread out to the surroundings rapidly. At the same time, the members of the expedition could see that the same dark clouds were also forming in the sky and other parts of the sky castle, even though there were buildings around them. The clouds quickly became one and covered the entire sky castle. Damn it, that's a psychic tower that connects two realms. Archbishop Martin yelled in disbelief. He was frightened and instantly turned as pale as a sheet. Everyone knew that a psychic tower was the magic tower of a necromancer where necromancers studied necromagic. At the same time, it would be a huge addition to the power of necromagic. Almost every necromancer would have the lifelong goal of building a psychic tower, which could be called the highest crystallization of necromagic. A necromancer who owned a psychic tower would almost be invincible as long as he stood in a spot that was covered by the black fog of the psychic tower. That was actually very similar to a mage's magic tower. The main reason that the construction of a psychic tower appeared to be countless times more difficult than a normal magic towers because of the environment. Although high elves had studied necromagic before during the Dark Age, they had always been hostile to the necromancers on the surface. After the end of the Dark Age, the Brilliant Shrine was established, thus making it difficult for necromancers to continue to survive.
Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.